Arose from out the ashen main. Arose from out the ashen main. This was the charter of the land, and guardian angels sang this strain.
So how are we all feeling now, with Brexit night a few weeks behind us? Do we feel energised? Do we feel that we have accomplished something? Do we feel that we have taken back control, or even that we have changed politics for good? My guess is a lot of us are feeling some or all of those things, and that's all right. In fact, it's more than all right, even quite a bit more than all right. Because something momentous has been achieved, or at least to be more honest about it, with the formality of the UK leaving the European Union, a momentous decision has been taken. Since whilst we remain in the period of the withdrawal agreement, nothing actually nor materially has changed. Except, of course, that we now have no representation in the organisation that continues to govern us. So, glossing over the inconvenient fact that we happen to actually be in a worse state than we were on the 31st of January, the formality of leaving means that our destiny has changed. It is an unchangeable statement of intent, rather than a change itself. And although this was always a period that we were going to have to go through, since Theresa May unwisely took the Article 50 route, we must remain vigilant that this statement of intent is delivered upon by the 1st of January next year. Anything else would leave us as a vassal state forevermore. But nonetheless, whilst allowing for this caveat, we can allow ourselves to believe that we have won, in a sense. We, the little people, have beaten the MPs, the lords, the media, business, academia, and the experts in deciding where we want this country to head. And that's not insignificant. It's not insignificant at all. That technical victory, if not yet the real one, is something really quite remarkable. Although in another way it's not remarkable because it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be remarkable that a democratic decision be acted upon. It shouldn't ever have been in doubt. What is remarkable is that the establishment attempted to stop it from being enacted. What's remarkable is that it was ever in doubt. And what's more remarkable is that we, the great unwashed, have had to fight and claw and bitch and moan and insist that the principle of democracy be honoured. We didn't expect to have to be doing that, and crucially, it became obvious that they didn't expect us to fight for it. And fight for it we did. And despite the frankly tyrannical way in which they attempted to take our democracy from us, we brought them to heel without ever resorting to violence. They tried to cheat us out of our vote with every underhanded trick in the book. And we beat them without ever breaking the rules. That's not nothing. That's something quite remarkable. That's the Brexit spirit. And we should continue to channel that Brexit spirit in the coming months, years and decades. Because what does the Brexit spirit actually mean? Without going all Wolfie Smith on you, to me the Brexit spirit just means, at its crudest, people power. The recognition that we, the people at the bottom, despite our lowly status, by harnessing our numbers can bend the world to our will. That we, the masses, are the masters and the governors are our servants. The clue is in the title. Public servant. But they, of course, thought they knew better. They thought they knew better how to organise and run our lives better than we know ourselves. They thought that the title public servant or civil servant was a quaint anachronism, and that everybody really knew the truth of the matter. The truth being, at least as they thought it, that they were the ones who were really in charge, that they were the ones that were to be listened to and deferred to, and that we were just to doff our caps to our social betters and do what we were told, because Squire knows best. But we didn't see it that way, being the quaint and simple folk that we are. We took the words and the principles at face value. They were the servants, not us, and they were to listen to us, not us to them. They expected us to do as we were told. We told them to implement the referendum. And they did, eventually, but they didn't like it. They still don't. And although they are being forced into doing what they have been instructed to do by people poorer and less educated and financially weaker than them, their image of themselves as better than us won't vanish overnight. For all their doctorates and university degrees, these fuckers need re-educating in the principles of democracy. Because they, and those like them, drag out quotes from those we respect, in order to undermine our confidence and somehow persuade us that we are not in fact up to it, that we are too innocent, too childlike, and yes, I'm afraid, far too stupid to decide things for ourselves. One of these quotes I remember was, of course, from Churchill. "The greatest argument against democracy is a conversation with the average voter," he is supposed to have said. Maybe that's true. Maybe he did say that. Maybe it was taken out of context. But even if it wasn't, where does that lead us? Where's the ultimate logical destination to that statement? The logical conclusion to that statement is that we, as citizens, are not to be trusted. That we have not the education, the wit, or even the raw intelligence, let alone the judgment to decide what happens in society, to ourselves in fact. Because we're just a little people, we don't control the state controls us. To us, the state, the country, belongs to us and is there for our benefit. To them, however, the state is there to do things to us and not for us. Of course, in realpolitik, it is sometimes necessary for the state to act outside of us. For example, when ignoring the wishes of one citizen to benefit 100 others. But we understand that. We understand that we need to forgive someone like Churchill a little condescension considering what he had to deal with. No such leeway needs to be afforded Anna Soubry, Dominic Grieve, or Emily Thornberry. Because Brexit has demolished that. It has shattered that into a million pieces. The Brexit spirit has reasserted the primacy of the people. It has refuted the idea that we are subordinate to the state and that we are just national insurance numbers to be filed and pushed around a monopoly board. The state is ours in terms of Brexit. It's not just ours in theory, it's actually ours in practice. But in so many other areas, the state's grip on us still seems inescapable. In the area of government surveillance, the opposite is the case. The state really does belong to them, and that being the case, it is something that is done to us and not for us. Ever since two 10-year-olds took 2-year-old James Bolger from a Manchester shopping centre in 1993 before torturing him, murdering him and leaving him on some railway tracks, the CCTV system that was instrumental in discovering the sequence of events was lauded as the next great thing in crime prevention. No matter that the CCTV had not in fact prevented anything, not least James's abduction before any prevention could be achieved. The so-called value of video surveillance was cemented in the public's view, helped along by a sensationalist media. As someone who had read and been somewhat traumatised by George Orwell's 1984 at school not that many years before, I remember being distinctly uneasy about the promotion of the idea of unblinking surveillance, what Orwell called the telescreen. More recently, I had also read Geoffrey Robertson's Freedom, the Individual and the Law, much more recently. It was first published in 1972, but I had read the 1993 reprint, which was probably my first exposure to the idea of the nature of the power-hungry state. Having read both of these books, I connected the dots in a way that maybe others didn't. But it is to my eternal shame that it has only been the last few years that I have stopped not just moaning about the surveillance state, but have actively tried to resist it. I consider 1984 to be perhaps the most important book ever written, and although it is far from a pleasant read, I would encourage everyone to read it and to make your children read it, on pain of violence, or at least the removal of internet privileges. Pride and Prejudice, The Great Gatsby, The Grapes of Wrath, Great Expectations and the whole canon of Shakespeare are worth ingesting, of course, but all other literature should be placed back on the bookshelf until you have read 1984. Because what followed after poor James Bulger's murder was a proliferation of video surveillance that became known by the anonymous-sounding euphemism CCTV. Before James's murder, such things only existed at military installations, sensitive government buildings and maybe high-security banks. Now, as we know, they are everywhere. At ports, airports, railway stations, tube stations, bus stations, tram stations, petrol stations, libraries, museums, shopping centres, banks, job centres, council offices, post offices, on buses, on trains, on tube trains, in lifts, in taxis, garden centres, builders' merchants, plumbers' merchants, electrical wholesalers, department stores, florists, hardware stores, clothes shops, shoe stores, pubs, restaurants, cafes, sports centres, gyms, cinemas, bowling alleys, and even into our public spaces where we could previously expected some degree of anonymity, where their unblinking eyes keep a watch over our shopping streets, road junctions, both minor and major, motorway junctions, footbridges, and practically anywhere the authorities damn well please. Only in the deepest countryside can we escape them, and even here the probably empty threat is issued with signs announcing this area is monitored by CCTV. But we didn't object. We didn't object, partly out of respect for James Bulger, and partly because we uncritically swallowed the copper's lie of, if you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to fear. We didn't object then, because it's a difficult statement to counter. We've been too timid in countering this pernicious argument, much as, in the same way, we've been too timid to question uncontrolled immigration for fear of being labelled racist. Because to object is to suggest that you do, in fact, have something to hide. To object is to invite the tag guilty, at least by the police. So we were too timid to object to CCTV. That emboldened them and encouraged them to introduce automatic number plate recognition, also known by the equally anonymous acronym ANPR. Ironic, isn't it, that the technology that removes one's anonymity is itself known by an anonymous euphemism. We've had ANPR since 2002, so any journey anyone has taken in a motor vehicle for the last 18 years on any major road or motorway in the UK has been known to the authorities. Promoted as denying criminals the use of the road, ANPR is now a mass surveillance tool of the state to keep an eye on us, the overwhelmingly law-abiding citizens of this overwhelmingly law-abiding country. Still, again, we were too timid to challenge it. Still, we swallowed the lie that it was there to protect us, rather than just to control us. After CCTV was introduced, we allowed it, presumably on the grounds that so long as it doesn't go too far. Then ANPR was introduced, and we allowed it, also presumably on the grounds that that also did not go too far. And now, what do we have being trialled, first in South Wales and now sneaked out when all of our focus is on Brexit? The rollout of facial recognition technology across London. We are all presumed guilty now, for we are all in a continuous police lineup without them having to bother with the inconvenience of actually asking our permission. We now have automatic number plate recognition for people. Live facial recognition technology, soon to be known by the equally anonymous acronym LFR, is the last piece, the final piece in the surveillance matrix. Sure, it's probably a bit shit now, but once it is perfected, and it will be, that will be the end of any kind of anonymity for anyone, anywhere, forever. Once it is perfected, the state will know where every single one of us is at all times. It will not only be the end of anonymity, it will also be the end of privacy. And since freedom necessarily walks on the legs of privacy, it will also be the effective end of freedom. And as welcome as Brexit is, by then, that won't mean shit. So think about that. Because how can you be free if you're being monitored? That's just an electronic leash. The act of monitoring influences one's behaviour. A child or a teenager will not misbehave if they are being watched. Ah, you may say, the same is true of people generally. Indeed it is, but this is the crux of the matter. There are children, and there are adults. Adults quite naturally sit in judgment of the behaviour of children. But the surveillance state assumes to itself the position of the adult, and consequently the citizen becomes the child. But we are not children, and we're certainly not children of the state. But the surveillance state infantilizes us and reduces us from the status of citizen to that of an eternal child. A child that needs to be looked after, and more crucially, a child that is to be eternally distrusted. By exercising and claiming our right to decide the direction that this country is to be steered, we have demonstrated that we are not children. We are not children to be cared for, but citizens to be obeyed, and we have made them obey our decision to leave the European Union. The surveillance state, however, still insists that it is in charge of us by watching and monitoring and, yes, distrusting us. The surveillance state insists that we remain the children and that they remain the adult. The Brexit spirit refutes this, and it is right to do so. Their patrician argument that they are protecting us might just hold a little more water if it could be demonstrated they have been successful in doing just that. It would still be wrong, of course. It will always be wrong. But when one considers that the principal argument for the surveillance state and its array of invasive technology has singularly and absolutely failed to protect the most vulnerable in our society from a genuine threat, even that false justification falls so far short as to be laughable, or at least it would be laughable if it wasn't so desperately and shamefully tragic. I am talking, of course, of the industrial scale abuse and rape of thousands upon thousands of young girls, children in fact, by gangs of men almost in plain sight. As I have said before, if ever there was an argument for the surveillance state, or for the sweeping aside of civil liberties in order to combat a crime so serious, so widespread and so revolting, then this was it. But of course they didn't do that. Why not? Why didn't they use their formidable surveillance apparatus to prevent such appalling crimes? I'll tell you why. Because that's not what the surveillance state is for. For anybody who says that the cameras are there to protect us, just ask the 19,000 girls who were abused last year, or even the estimated 100,000 girls that have been gang raped in total, just how protected they felt because of the surveillance state. Get this through your heads, people. Surveillance technologies are there to protect nobody. Nobody, that is, except those who run the state itself, of course. We didn't protest in the 80s, the 90s, or even in the 2000s, when they kept us out of the decisions on the EU, when it was clear that it was going in a direction that we hadn't agreed upon. When we finally did protest, the referendum was the result. Even after the result, they tried to stuff the genie back into the bottle, but we stood firm and they reluctantly did as they were told. Likewise, we didn't protest CCTV when we should have. We didn't protest ANPR when we really should have. And now we're faced with the surveillance matrix so complete there will be no escape from it. So the hour is late and much of our precious anonymity, privacy and freedom has been lost already. But we must channel that Brexit spirit and insist that the state, and in particular the surveillance state, is to work for us and not against us. The state, the country, the nation, the realm is ours and should work for us and not be used as a tool to do things to us. By refusing any longer to be subject to their monitoring and insisting on the rollback not only of facial recognition but also ANPR, CCTV and the entire concept of the surveillance state, we really will be honouring the Brexit spirit. Let's really take back control.